Hi, I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. I'm at the Anderson School of Management at UCLA. We're here for our Faculty Spotlight series, and today we're going to meet a happiness expert, Professor Cassie Holmes, who has been at UCLA since 2016 after spending 7 years at the Wharton School. She has a PhD from Stanford and an undergraduate degree in psychology from Columbia University. Cassie is also the author of Happier Hour, which is a Wall Street Journal bestseller and named by Amazon as one of the best books of the year in 2022. Cassie, I want to take you to what I think is your aha moment. It was roughly 11 years ago. You're in New York City after a lecture at Columbia. You get on a train. It's the very last train to leave the station to go to Philadelphia, where you're a tenure-track professor at Wharton, and you are feeling exhausted, overwhelmed. And what happens when you feel that way?
Yes. I was feeling time poor. I felt like I had too much to do and not enough time to do it. And in that moment on the train, as I'm watching the night lights whiz by, it's like, I don't know if I can keep up between the pressures of work, wanting to be a good parent, a good partner, a good friend, never-ending pile of chores is just too much. And so many people feel this way, this sense of being overwhelmed. And in that moment, I was like, I don't think I can keep up. And maybe the solution is to quit everything and move to a sunny island somewhere, right? We have this daydream. But I did not. And instead, as a researcher, I'm like, as someone already who is studying happiness and the role of time, this is something that I should figure out. How should we be investing our day's hours so that we feel greater joy at the end of our days, so that at the end of the weeks, we are not looking back and feeling depleted and exhausted and overwhelmed, and so that at the end of our lives, we're not looking back with regret. And so I directed my research agenda to figure this out. And from my research since then, I have sort of developed answers to this question. And I live it, and now I teach it, which is so fulfilling. And absolutely, I still have a lot to do, and there are still only 24 hours in a day.
True.
But I feel satisfied and happier with my life.
What was the first study you did to examine how people become happy?
Back before that time, during my PhD, what I was looking at, what's the effect of focusing on time as opposed to money as our critical resource? And what I found is that just shifting attention away from money and towards time makes people happier because it makes them more deliberate with how they spend their time, investing their time in ways that feel more fulfilling and worthwhile. And what's really interesting is that from that point, I started looking at in my work, not just the effect of focusing on time, but really how should we be thinking about our time? And what is the role of time? If it's about, having more time, will that be the secret to greater happiness? And actually, sort of on that night on the train, when I felt so overwhelmed and just wishing that I had more time, thinking that if only I had a few more hours in the day, or actually a lot more hours in my days, then I would be happier. But interestingly, in work that I've done with Hal Hirschfield and Mercer Sharif, we examined what is the relationship between the amount of discretionary time people have and their happiness. And what we found is really interesting. And it is the pattern of results is this upside down U shape, which is interesting because it means that happiness goes down on both ends of the spectrum, because we found that those with too little time in our data set among tens of thousands of working and non-working Americans, those with less than approximately 2 hours of discretionary time in the day were less happy. That was like me on the train that night, right? But what was so interesting was this other end of the spectrum where we saw that those with more than approximately 5 hours of discretionary time in the day were also less happy. And what that means is there's such thing as having too much time. And what that also means is that in those hectic days where we feel so time poor, where we are so stressed out and feeling overwhelmed and thinking that the solution is to give up everything, that's not. That won't necessarily bring greater happiness. Really, the answer is how do we invest the time that we have, the hours of our days, so that we feel greater satisfaction, so that at the end of those days, we don't look back in that state of exhaustion and feeling depleted and overwhelmed. And rather, at the end of the week, even though your schedule might be full, that you feel fulfilled. And so it's not about being less busy, it's about spending the time that you have on those things that matter.
So easy to say and so hard to do though, right?
Yes, but what's also really fun is that from my research, I've identified, and actually applying my research in the course that I teach, I do identify some strategies for my students to figure out for themselves, what are those ways of spending that are more worthwhile? What are those ways that they tend to be spending that are actually those things that do feel like a waste, that do fill our schedule without providing fulfillment? And so going through these exercises based off of our research, so that people can not only become more deliberate and intentional with how they spend their time, but also informed of how to spend their time so that they feel greater fulfillment.
What I love is that you've been able to take your scholarly research and immediately deploy it in the classroom by developing this course for MBAs.
I know, it's so fun.
Because that direct correlation often doesn't occur in academia. And I wonder how difficult it was to take that research and to develop your course, which is among the most popular courses here.
Well, it definitely took a lot of work, but it was so worthwhile. And being at a business school throughout my career, I have absolutely taught more traditional business courses. But then I got to a point in my career where I realized that there's so much knowledge in our research, not only mine, but those of colleagues in my field, that folks could benefit from. And so it was worth the investment of my time to pull some of those insights together so that our students can benefit from the research that is being conducted not only here at UCLA Anderson, but across the field. And it's been absolutely rewarding and so fulfilling. And when I go back to the whole thing that motivated my work is figuring out how do we spend our time for greater satisfaction. And that's absolutely what I've been doing with this course, and seeing the effect on my students over the course of the quarter is super fun. But now that I've been teaching it for the last 5 years, I hear from students from previous years of how these insights continue to play out, both in their career decisions, but also in how they approach their day-to-day. And it's so important because nowadays, so many folks are burnt out. For our MBA students, we absolutely need to give them the tools to get the job and to do well on the job, but we also need to give them the tools so that they can design their careers, design their life to feel greater satisfaction, so that 10 years on, that burnout doesn't make them give up everything and leave their professions.
I mean, you're teaching life skills, really. And this goes beyond what many people might consider an MBA education. You think, I'm going to come here, I'm going to study accounting, finance, marketing, strategy. But there are these other really magical moments that you basically collide with. And Happier Hour, the name of your course, is one of them. So what do you tell your MBA students? Because many of them are experiencing exactly what you felt on that train, particularly as they go through the core curriculum.
Yes. So it's interesting because it's not only sort of managing their time here during their MBA experience, but I actually catch them as it's one of their last courses as they are entering out into their lives. So the thing that I think that they really get from the course, because I structure it, there's the part that is how do you design your day-to-day so that you're managing your energy, you're managing your motivation, and that they absolutely apply to their experience while juggling their coursework, while having the fun experience, networking, connecting with their classmates, while figuring out what they want to do next and professionally. So they can apply that, but then there's also the part of the course where it's absolutely about designing their career so that it's in line with their values, so that it's in line with their purpose. And that is something that they will continue to take on. And then the last portion of the course is really designing their lives so that they look back without regret. And those lessons, while they do play out and they influence actually how they engage with their relationships during while being a student at Anderson, it's those lessons and that thinking that actually is what I hear from my former students of how these lessons continue to benefit them.
So it's about making choices too then, because if you're asking people to be more reflective about the career that they want, they're less likely to be funneled into the traditional financial services and consulting game, which many MBAs fall into almost by default.
But even actually thinking about this sort of from a broader perspective of what matters to them, it might be that they choose to go into finance. It might be that they choose to go into consulting, but there's more reflection onto why. And when it's sort of taking, actually research shows this, that among folks across industries, across levels within particular industries, when someone knows the why of their work, that they know the reason for it, the meaning behind it, the purpose of it, and to the extent that that aligns with what matters to them, then you see these tremendous effects on their motivation, their job satisfaction, which is a significant predictor of their life satisfaction. And there you see the tenure within their careers and within their jobs. And so I absolutely do not think that my course is steering people into particular industries or career tracks. What it is doing is making individuals really thoughtful and intentional. So making sure that those decisions are in line with what matters to them, instead of this sort of nebulous idea of what success is or what matters, for them taking the time to reflect what matters to them. And then that can guide their decision making, which is so important.
Now, Cassie, how is it that you became an academic? You were studying psychology at Columbia, and I think there was an aha moment there as well for you when you realized that there's psychology behind all of our behaviors and our decisions in life. Is that the moment that you said to yourself, you know, this is really worth additional study and this is something I'd like to throw my life into?
I don't know if it was while I try to teach my students to be super intentional. I don't know if mine was quite as intentional as that. What I did realize, and actually it was in a social psychology course as an undergrad, I like people. I really love people and understanding what drives them and watching. I'm actually an introvert, but I love people and I love watching how they interact and what motivates them and how their situation influences their behavior. And when I learned that there were opportunities to actually study this and make sense of what I love to do already and sort of put some rigor around it, empirics around it to inform what I was initially observing, that is so satisfying. And so I am a psychologist still, while my entire career and training has been in a business school. And what's so neat about the business context is that you can apply that psychology. And that's absolutely what motivated me to develop this course, right? It's the research and then figuring out how can you apply that, how can individuals apply that so that they can experience the benefits of it, they can be happier.
Makes sense. What have you learned from your students?
I learned so much from my students and I get so much joy from seeing how they interact with the material, and then the next step is applying that. And what I learn is seeing all the different ways that these empirics, this research plays out in their contexts. And so it's that they're relaying back their experience. And while there's a lot of variety in it, you know, the research insight is that common thread. And so the thing that I learn are those examples of like this insight can benefit people in all of these different ways. And then I can pull their stories and examples to then reflect back to the broader group so that more people can see, okay, this is how this could fit into my experience and could benefit me.
Now, I'm imagining you bring your students through a number of exercises.
Yes.
Can you share one with us?
Yes. Each week, it's an experiential sort of approach to teaching. Each week, an assignment is an exercise that they go and do. An example. So the first week, their assignment is to do a digital detox. So at some point that week, for 6 consecutive hours, get offline. And what's really interesting And they, I will say, are very anxious going into this because this notion of like, oh my gosh, people are going to need me. I need to be productive in the sense that if you're not available, then you can't be productive. But what's so interesting is seeing the cadence of their experience throughout the 6 hours. And that first hour, I think, is quite anxiety provoking. They have that sort of habit of reaching to their phone and wondering, what am I missing? But then it shifts into, by being disconnected from all the noise out here, it allows them to fully connect with what they're doing and whom they're with. And you actually see that people become more productive because all of the distracting little tasks that they busy themselves with are sort of, pushed to the wayside, and they can really dig in to the big stuff, the important stuff, the stuff that really matters to them. There's also, there's so many.
But the lesson there is
It's
all about the importance of being present.
Yes.
Because if you're present, you can more fully utilize your time than if you're not. And you're continually distracted, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, in terms of how do we invest our time for greater happiness? One piece of it is spending on activities that are more worthwhile and minimizing the amount of time you spend on activities that are less worthwhile and more wasteful. But another big piece of it is how you are engaged during those activities, those worthwhile ones in particular. To what extent are you present? Are you not distracted, and is your mind pulling you somewhere else? Because if you're going to be spending the time, you better make it count. And if your thoughts are elsewhere, then for those joyful activities, you're missing them. For the potential opportunities to get into flow and produce something and create something really wonderful, it doesn't give you the space to do that. So it's sort of those together. The digital detox is teaching folks how to be more mindful, is something as simple as changing our mindset during the time that we're spending.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So of all the studies that you've done on time and happiness, I wonder if there's one in particular that really was more meaningful to you as a researcher, a scholar, a teacher.
A project that I continue to find so much value in is the happiness that we enjoy from our different experiences, whether extraordinary or ordinary. And in this work, that was really our question. Is it those extraordinary, once in a lifetime, milestones, incredible vacations, incredible cultural events, or is it the simple moments that are sort of part of our regular day-to-day that produce the greatest happiness? And what we found was that at first glance, it looked like it was driven by age. So what we find is that among younger individuals, it is the extraordinary experiences that produce greater happiness than the ordinary experiences. As people get older, ordinary experiences start to produce greater happiness, such that among an older population, ordinary experiences produce as much happiness as extraordinary experiences. But it's not about age per se. It is about how we think about the time that we have.
Yeah.
Younger people tend to view their futures as more expansive. As you get older, you tend to realize that your futures are more limited. But younger people can recognize their time in life as finite, as limited. And when that happens, and I actually think that the pandemic led all of us to recognize that our time in life is finite, is limited, and precious, I think it has drawn all of us to really notice the happiness in ordinary moments, to savor those moments more. And it's those simple moments that are available and accessible to all of us. And again, it's about paying attention. And so in my work, if you're sort of pulling it all together, that the answer for greater happiness isn't about necessarily having a whole lot more time available. It's really how you spend the time, and when you are investing in those activities that potentially bring you joy, is noticing them. And it's those little nuggets that keep us motivated, that keep us fulfilled, and help us manage against that overwhelm.
So for an older person, it might be reading a bedtime story to a grandchild. It may be cooking a meal for your family. Simple, ordinary things like that give you great joy.
Yeah, it's about noticing, the sunset. It's
Yes.
about having that conversation with someone you love, whether with a grandchild, whether with a partner, whether with a friend. Honestly, actually, a lot of it comes from the relationships that we have. It is those shared moments with others and paying attention, soaking them up. Because it's those relationships, that connection, that can happen not only through family relationships or friendships outside of our professional lives, but absolutely through the friendships that we develop in the workplace, in our experience at Anderson. It is those connections that really fuel us and bring us joy.
So Cassie, your PhD is in marketing from Stanford, but instead of choosing to figure out how Cheerios is marketed to kids, or how maybe even Philip Morris markets cigarettes to adults, you chose a really unusual topic. And what's really interesting to me is a business school has nurtured and encouraged you to do so. Are you surprised by that?
I'm appreciative. What's interesting is that my interest in going into marketing in the first place was my interest in people and what drives their decisions and their satisfaction with those decisions. But then I was like, I don't just care about people's satisfaction with their decisions between products. I really want them to be satisfied with the decisions they make in their lives. And so that's what motivated me to sort of pursue the research that I do, and then ultimately to convince the administration that this was a course worth teaching at a business school. And I will say, it doesn't look like a course that you might expect from a business school, but it is so important that our students don't just get the tools that they need for that initial job and so that they do well in it. That's absolutely important, but they also need to have the tools to make decisions in their lives, both in the day-to-day, how to maintain their energy, motivation, but also their decisions so that at the end of their years, they can look back with satisfaction and without regret.
So behavioral research has become an increasingly popular area for academics at business schools. How come?
Yeah, and it's an area within our business school that I love so much. We have an incredible faculty with folks across disciplines who are interested in figuring out how do people make decisions, and with the decisions that they make, how do they play out and benefit them in their lives across domains. While I'm interested in how it affects our happiness and our subjective and emotional well-being, and I love having collaborators who work with me on these questions within our behavioral decision-making area. I also have colleagues who are looking at how it can benefit them with respect to their health decisions, how it can benefit them with respect to sort of constructing an organization that functions well, how it can benefit the sort of interrelations among groups and individuals so that there's greater sense of belonging and inclusivity. Our faculty, decision-making is at the core of so much in terms of what benefits us, not only in the sort of business domain, but in society. And then pulling back to my interest as individuals, that our faculty are speaking to and informing.
So Cassie, I'm wondering, when you walk into a classroom and you face a room full of students, are you happy?
Well, at that point, I'm probably a little nervous if I haven't met them before, but I am absolutely excited for what we sort of have ahead of us.
Well, I think your students are very lucky.
Well, I'm lucky to have them.
Cassie, it's been a pleasure.
It has been, thank you.
So this is John Byrne with Poets and Quants. You've been watching part of our Faculty Spotlight series at the Anderson School of Management at UCLA, of course. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and you may even want to look for this book written by Cassie. Again, a Wall Street Journal bestseller and one of Amazon's best business books of the year in 2022. Join us for other parts of our series. Thanks for watching.